So if I'm successful in this presentation, it will represent a return to our former theme in terms of celebrating the successes of 50 years of lake committees. And we consider this particular project to be an exemplary in terms of what happens when you get collaborations that stem from great relationships between folks across the basin. And the last part of this presentation is actually going to be the most important part. So try to stay awake for that, and I'll dispense with some of the history as briefly as possible because it's a lengthy history. Mark Aidner alluded earlier to that this effort is over 15 years since its start, and actually quite a bit longer than that. I think we're actually approaching maybe close to 15 years when Cora was first helping us try to get bloater eggs from Lake Superior. But in the management context, the two previous FCO documents that have been justifiably cut apart by Dr. Hansen called for the restoration of native deepwater coregonets in Lake Ontario. And I know when I came to the Lake Ontario unit in 1999, Tom Stewart, just recently retired from OM and RF, immediately we started to talk about bringing this to the fore and trying to initiate efforts. And that's what led to the collaboration initially with Cora and Ralph Wilcox as a commercial fisherman on Lake Superior. And due to a number of factors, most notably ice, that effort didn't get very far. But since then, Mike Connerton and Tom Stewart have drafted an excellent draft strategic plan for restoration of native deepwater coregonets. I won't get into that, but the most important part here is that obviously any large-scale stocking program to reintroduce native species in the Great Lakes is stocking a lot of fish, and that's been our greatest impediment. So why do we want to do this? I think it's probably pretty obvious to most of you, but essentially the loss of deepwater coregonets throughout the Great Lakes Basin amounts to an ecological catastrophe. We want to diversify the forage base, and due to especially the heightened concern with thiamine deficiency in Lake Ontario predator this year, namely rainbow trout, we're hopeful that this will obviously benefit most notably lake trout restoration by having a benthic fish of large size that has higher thiamine levels. We hope it will increase the stability of the offshore fish community, given the fact that right now seems to represent a fairly empty niche. And obviously these natives are adapted to this environment and get to a larger size, as I mentioned before. You heard Mark Gaydon earlier mention Walter Kelts. So we'll bring Walter back again. And this table illustrates what the historic distribution of deepwater coregonets was throughout each of the Great Lakes. Some of you may take exception to some of that. The X's here, I'll just note, represent some questionable occurrence or possible taxonomic separation that was questionable. But if you're moving forward to the present, if you look at the extirpations, Lake Ontario in particular lost all of our deepwater coregonets. So what I'm going to talk about today and the work that we're doing and the work that we're proposing is not just about Lake Ontario. The work we're doing will certainly benefit the efforts of other lake committees as they pursue deepwater coregonet restorations. And this was mentioned earlier as well, Mark Aidner, that we now have 4 lake committees that are in various stages of planning for restoration of both shallow water and deepwater coregonets. So the major challenges for production level, it's very easy, well I shouldn't say very easy. We first started raising bloaters in the garage at the Cape Vincent Fishery Station. That was a project that Mike Connerton undertook. And we learned very quickly, as have others, that these are not easy animals to raise. They have some unique life history traits. And aside from the fact that they're spawning at an ungodly time of year and a horrible environment, once you do get past that egg take stage, the challenges begin, because these animals, when they first hatch out, have extremely small mouth parts. And so they're not able to feed on typical commercial starter diets, And in addition, the small size particles that you do have to introduce to the water, they get caught up in the surface tension. So our folks, we've been very blessed to get a number of gifted fish culturists who have now learned that to introduce food in a spray system, to break down that surface tension and get these very small starter diets to get down to where the fish can actually get at them. But most notably here, we're starting out from ground zero, basically. There are no North American fish culture programs that have this type of expertise. A group of folks have visited Finland, where they do large-scale coragonid aquaculture, and we've brought back some of that technology, have some great minds in the fish culture system now that will try to capitalize on what they learned in Finland. We've made great advances. So after these little fits and starts, in failures, quite frankly, I think the turning point here, don't think the turning point, I know the turning point was basically Dr. Goddard. I think Dr. Goddard, in his frustration with our inability to make progress, he basically commissioned John Detmers and Gary Isbell to herd the cats and say, get on these guys and start working together as a team. And that really was the genesis of the successes we have to date. And we have come a long way in a very short period of time. I never dreamed that we'd actually have captive brood stock. And that's now at White Lake Fish Culture Station in Ontario, where we now have, with this year we'll have 5-year classes of brood stock on hand. We actually have brood stock that are ripening. So we have fish in captivity now that are actually, I don't know, I don't have an up-to-date, I don't know if anybody knows in the room if we've had any successful fertilization of eggs there, but I'll talk more about some of the research that we have planned for those broodstock in the future. We've stocked fall fingerlings from USGS Tunison Lab, and Ministry of Natural Resources now has been stocking bloaters into Lake Ontario at a variety of sizes, including some fish 18 months. We're transporting these fish well offshore, out over deep water where their native habitat would be, and also to try to get them beyond the mouths where predators are concentrated at the times of year that we're stocking those fish. I mentioned the challenges we have in fish culture, particularly in the early life stages, and if you look at these 4 different measures of survival in early life stages, so the green line being from egg to eye-up stage, the blue line from eye-up to the end of early rearing, and then the red line hatch to the end of early rearing, and the black line from the egg stage to the end of early rearing. We've made significant progress. And this is largely, again, due to great talent we've captured there, not only at White Lake Fish Culture Station, but recently retired USGS fish physiologist George Catolo. Before I get to the most important slide, I just want to give you a little quick geographic distribution of our collaborators over the years. So this has truly been a basin-wide collaboration. Everywhere where there's a star, there's someone who's been intimately involved in this, or we're actually raising fish or actively engaged in research. So we get to the important part here, and if your name is missing, and Dr. Goddard's is, but sorry for that omission, but not intentional, but this is why this project has succeeded, is the people and the relationships that were forged at these very meetings. The fact that the folks on this screen talked to each other, got to know each other, and I just want to point out a few key turning points in this. I already mentioned Dr. Goddard's taking this on as a major mission of the Secretariat to try to get this going, but Kevin Loftus, when he was acting lake manager for Lake Ontario, he served in that position for 6 months. Though he did not get the job, his future career move was to become the head of fish culture in the province of Ontario. And when he took that job on, he immediately started to make plans to try to build a quarantine facility at the White Lake Fish Culture System to accommodate this particular project. Very noteworthy. and a huge part of the success of this project. Similarly, Jim Johnson from USGS Tunison, he also sought funds to build a quarantine facility at Tunison Lab of Aquatic Science in Cortland, New York, which also was able again to accommodate the research that George Catola did there. And then more recently, and most importantly, I think, in terms of getting eggs, has been Mark Holy's involvement in this project. So though Mark is far distant from us in New York and in Green Bay, Mark took on the challenge and assigned his staff to assist us in acquiring bloater eggs. And that project has been, since he's been involved, that's been really the backbone of this, to be able to get out there and send his staff out, people with fish culture expertise to get out on the vessel in very inhospitable climate. And some of the research we'll talk about on the next slide has been due to Mark's involvement in getting his staff involved. Before I leave, I need to look at this and see if I've missed anybody else. Okay. So where are we going now? This year we actually had our largest egg take yet. And that's again a testimony to Mark and his folks' involvement. But we've switched from gill nets, which, as those of you know, the bloater fishery, gill nets sometimes are set for lengthy periods of time because of weather, the inability to retrieve those nets. And the issue with the gill nets primarily being set in 200 to 300 feet of water was when you had ripe female bloaters on the bottom of the lake in the gill nets. By the time the net reached the vessel, they were no longer a ripe fish. They were basically a spent fish due to the pressure relief and the expansion of the swim bladder, forcing eggs out of the ovaries. So Roger's staff have now switched to getting on Hickey Brothers vessels, and we're doing bottom trawling. And so we're getting fish that are fresher. We're also looking into research to keep some of those fish that survive the bottom trawling experience and get them into a stream-side rearing trailer where they will be induced with hormones, try to induce gonad maturation. That type of research is also going to begin at White Lake Fish Culture Station with a broodstock, looking at the survival of eggs and fry using hormone inducement and also just through natural maturation of those broodstock. And though we've made great strides in the fish husbandry aspect, especially diets, we have a long way to go, because the one particular diet that is most successful for these early life stages is otohime from Japan. It's extremely expensive and it's extremely difficult to bring it into Canada. So we'd like to start some trials with other commercially available diets that are less expensive, and checking out different types of diets across a range of temperature regimens to look at not only the first feeding stages, but also the mid-stage and advanced rearing stages. And lastly, a team of researchers in Ontario have put together a proposal that will become part of GLaDOS, and that will be to put acoustic tags inside some of the surplus broodstock from White Lake Fish Culture Station and put those into an area of Lake Ontario that will be bounded by an acoustic array and actually calculate survival estimates and whatnot. And I, for one, never ever believed that you could surgically implant a transmitter in a bloater and have it live. But Ontario has succeeded at that. We now have fish with dummy transmitters in them. They've been alive now for what, 8 months, Tim?
4.5 months.
4.5 months. Well, I exaggerate, but that's pretty darn good. Never would have dreamed. They will be alive at 8 months. So again, none of this would ever have happened without the Lake Committee structure, these types of meetings, people getting together, developing personal relationships, and I think it's just absolutely incredible that we're in a world where we typically are very self-focused, selfish, territorial. This project, I think, exemplifies just the opposite, where folks have taken their resources away from existing programs to benefit a lake that isn't even not in their backyard, right, Mark? So great testimony to the people here, and I'm very pleased and proud to be a part of this team, even though I don't do much of the work anymore, except I guess the greatest, I get to take eggs across the border occasionally through customs to get them to Canada. So anyway, thanks for your attention, and we have time, I guess, for a few questions.